This is Great FM. Great FM.
Okay, get ready to pull out the psychology books on Great FM today, maybe just a little bit. Hi, everyone. Ahalya here, joining you on a brand new podcast. And in today's conversation, we're going to be exploring the value of emotional intelligence. Now, it's not, a general concept, but we're actually applying it to the profession of HR. So all of you HR professionals out there who diligently listen to our podcast, this one is for you. When you pause for a moment to think about it, it actually makes perfect sense that every HR professional should pay close attention to their personal emotional quotient and hone emotional intelligence as a skill. I was actually just talking about that with our guest who's joining us on the podcast today. And I don't mean to call anyone out, maybe just a little bit, but not every people professional thinks about this as intentionally, let's say, as would be beneficial for both one's professional as well as personal development, right? So a lot to unpack here. Please welcome to today's podcast said guest, Harshit Upadhyay, Senior Manager, People Strategy, Publicis Sapient, to help us explore the ins and outs of a topic that is definitely going to be of much use to all of you listening. Hi, Harshit, and welcome to Great FM. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to, talk about this, Alia. And like you, rightly said, this is not something that, we as HR professionals a lot of times deliberately talk about. There is a lot, for us to ponder. There's a lot for us to think. And I'm sure that the listeners will probably, go back thinking that, this is an area that I should probably explore a little bit more. So yeah, super excited about this conversation.
Yes, and God knows we need your help through all the conversation. So let's dive into it. I want to set the context by, just giving the definition, right, of emotional intelligence, often also referred to as emotional quotient. It's defined as the ability to perceive, use, understand, manage, and handle emotions. And like we were discussing, pretty intuitive for HR professionals to possess this skill. But Harshit, can we start by emphasizing why this is such an important aspect of intelligence for HR professionals to work on, and which areas it may impact in the workplace and in an HR professional's career life cycle?
Absolutely. And before that, I'd just like to, lay down the context, Alia, that a lot of times people assume that emotional intelligence is something that you're born with, right? Some people are. But for some people, it is an acquired skill, right? And it's absolutely fine, if you feel that, you are somewhere on the journey of learning about emotional intelligence and developing it, that's great. So till the time you have that acknowledgement, I think, that's a great start, because, emotional intelligence, or EI, to say so, is very critical in, the roles that we play. As HR professionals, communication is something that everybody relies on us, right? It's the business, it's the employees. So what truly emotional intelligence does is it helps us in understanding and managing emotions, right? Emotions from where people are coming from. And that actually helps us to have more clear and effective communications with teams, with leaders across the organization. So that's the first space, right? It helps us enhance our communications.
Right.
The second bit, which is extremely important, is conflict resolution, right? So that is, somewhere bread and butter of every HR professional's job, right? So what emotional intelligence really does is, it helps us HR professionals with the ability to navigate conflicts sensitively and effectively, right? So it's important for us to ensure that when we are, managing a conflict or we're providing resolutions, it supports both the organizational goals as well as the employee well-being, right? So that balance has to strike. So oftentimes, we kind of tend to deter towards one of the sides, but, the balance is what, is very important, and emotional intelligence helps us on that. The third bit of it is empathy and support, right? So as HR professionals, people look up to us for deeper understanding of their needs, their concerns, right? For us to be supportive for them and create that inclusive workplace culture. So that's the other bit. The fourth piece is leadership development. A lot of times, it's us as HR professionals who create a lot of leadership development programs. Right? We are the ones who nurture and, help in identify those qualities that, truly makes the leaders stand out. So what EI helps us do is it helps us identify and nurture those leadership qualities, because at the end of the day, it's closely linked to the ability of our leaders to be able to inspire and motivate other people. So I feel it's very important to leadership development. And lastly, I'd probably say is change management, right?
Right.
Every organization goes through multiple changes. A lot of times, the change is for the good, which is very easy to communicate and manage. A lot of times there are tough decisions. So what AI helps us do is it helps us provide the necessary skills to
Mhm.
manage change with a human-centered approach, right? Keeping people at the center, irrespective of how good or how not so good the decision is, because that at the end of the day helps us minimize resistance and maybe also, in the long run, enhance engagement. So, this is how I feel, Alia, that, in some of the top areas where emotional intelligence can actually help HR professionals have an impact in the workplace.
No, Harshit, I think, we've sufficiently justified the importance of emotional intelligence and why it's valuable to pay attention to it. And in research for today's conversation, I came across a study published in the Journal of Occupational and Organizational Psychology. And it was cited there that emotional intelligence in an organization was positively related to job satisfaction and negatively related to turnover intention, right? So my question to you is, given the justification and the clear value of emotional intelligence, why do you think this is a largely overlooked skill? My first question would be that. And then maybe my second question, to stay humble, is it overlooked?
Okay. So I'll put it in this way, right? In progressive organizations, it is not overlooked, right? Progressive organizations do think that emotional intelligence is equally important as IQ.
Right.
But there are still organizations, Alia, where, emotional intelligence can be overlooked, right? And there can be some reasons for it, right? So it's not a skill that is quantifiable, right? So there's this common misconception that a lot of people have, that emotional intelligence is less valuable than, having technical skills or business acumen, right? So there's really never focus on developing this as a skill.
Mhm.
And then this often comes with a short-term focus, right? So, so many organizations today just look at immediate results, than long-term benefits, because emotional intelligence always provides long-term benefits. It's never something that, you can see as a result in a quarter down the line, or, just 6 months down the line, right? Because in the long run, having people who have a strong EI really helps improve, teamwork, employee retention, like you talked about, right? There is also an underestimation a lot of times on the impact that actually emotional intelligence has, right? So there are so many areas in an organization where EI plays a critical role. Leadership effectiveness, right? If leaders don't have a strong EI or an EQ to say so, they're not going to be able to connect with teams. They're not going to be able to create a culture, which is psychological safe. They're not going to be able to motivate people, right? So your employee satisfaction gets impacted. The organization culture gets impacted. And many a times, some of these are often overlooked or underestimated on how important they are for the success of the organization in the long run. I think a very realistic problem that plagues several organizations is the lack of budgets that they have, or the lack of resources that they have for training.
Yeah.
Right. So when you have limited budget, this is often overlooked. So they don't have the resources, they don't have necessarily the people, in their learning team, who can actually come on board and create effective learning interventions to implement emotional intelligence training programs or developing programs, right? So that's why they are overlooked. But in progressive organizations, it's not. They understand that fostering emotional intelligence can lead to a more cohesive, resilient, and an engaged workplace.
No, I think that makes sense because, at least, so this Harvard Business School write-up that cited that 71% of employers value emotional intelligence more than technical skills when evaluating candidates probably comprises of those progressive organizations. But, I do want to talk about the other side of this then, Harshit, which is, should it be a criteria for the hiring of HR professionals, especially in this day and age when you talk about things like talent acquisition and talent retention as well, you have to take into consideration the diverse audiences that we are now,
Absolutely.
we now have present in our workforce. It's not just the hard-headed person who loved working, for money at the end of the day. People have different purposes at work these days.
So I don't know if people are going to like me for saying this, but I do think, Alia, that emotional intelligence should be a criteria for hiring HR professionals,
Okay.
right? And one of the things I think a lot of organizations today are focusing on is, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? DEI is a very strong fabric that, organizations want to build upon. And you can only do that if you have people who have the right emotional intelligence, right? And oftentimes, the HR professionals are folks who are actually leading that charter, right? They are the ones who are influencing business. They are the ones who are influencing people. They are the ones who are, trying to change things, right? And that's where you will need people to have that strong emotional intelligence to be able to understand what people are going through, to be able to drive that change, right? So it's important that it is there, right? And as HR professionals, Alia, relationship management is a crucial part of our role, right?
Right.
And building those trusted relationships is very, very important. And if you don't have a higher EQ, it can be very difficult to build and manage those relationships, right? Because through those relationships is where you're able to change the organization, right? Where you're able to have an impactful communication, where people listen to you, where people understand what you're trying to say, where people accept what you're trying to cascade down the chain. The other piece also is that HR professionals with strong emotional intelligence can actually provide stronger support and development opportunities for employees, right? So what it actually helps in the long run is it helps foster a culture of growth and satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, when you hire HR professionals with a higher EQ, I think in the long run, they probably become a better cultural fit for the organization. And I think they probably stay longer in the organization because they are more adept at assessing, integrating, and, eventually contributing towards the organization's culture and its growth story. So, yes, I will very strongly say that incorporate EI into hiring criteria for HR professionals, and that will lead to long-lasting benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we talked about having a diverse workforce, but that includes HR professionals as well, right? So it's important to also acknowledge the fact that HR is no longer just about the administrative capabilities of an organization, but actually bleeds into every area. We've got people professionals working in business strategy, in innovation culture. So if you're going to start bridging those gaps, then you've got to do it with a bit of sensitivity, for sure. So, to take that a step further, Harshit, I think you did mention something about emotional intelligence not being quantifiable, right?
Mhm.
Is there any kind of measure by which it can be perceived in the workplace, in the case of HR professionals specifically? Like you said, is it something that is tested during the hiring process in a qualitative fashion? Is it usually a part of KPIs and things like that?
Yes, it can be, right? But I think the way for us to look at it is that emotional intelligence is increasingly becoming a critical factor for us as HR professionals, right? And I think what a lot of organizations have started doing is, as part of the hiring process, they now have a lot of EI assessments for HR roles, right? So, and these could be in the form of behavioral interview questions, that's really aimed at understanding how a particular person would have handled past interpersonal challenges. We have a lot of psychological assessments that are available, a lot of simulation and situational analysis exercises that are there. So I think organizations have increasingly started to, incorporate that as part of the assessment. But
Right.
like you rightly said, it is challenging to measure emotional intelligence quantitatively, right? Because it is still a soft aspect.
Right.
So what a lot of organizations look at is they look at an indirect indicator such as employee satisfaction, turnover rates in the departments that the HR teams manage,
Yeah.
feedback from peers, sometimes 360-degree feedback, leadership reviews to really gauge the impact of an HR professional's emotional intelligence. Right? So it's not direct, but that indirect indicators that are there, they're still considered. Right. And the feedback from that is what a lot of companies today are prioritizing on the development of EI for their HR teams. Right. So for a lot of HR professionals, in their growth plans, in their individual development plans, you will see developing your emotional intelligence as, a growth area. Right. So it is how do you improve your skills, right? How do you build upon that? How do you become more adept at it? So I think it's becoming a part of the evaluation process, in that way. right?
Okay.
And I think on a daily basis, if you have to ask me, how are HR professionals expected to demonstrate EI? It's in problem solving and decision making, right? So I, as an HR professional, have to understand, the workplace dynamics, the employee needs. I need to be very informed about the information overload that I'm getting, and then I have to be balanced and considerate while I'm trying to take some decisions, right? So therein it becomes important, and a lot of people observe that. Similarly, how I'm engaging with employees, how am I resolving their issues, how am I addressing their concerns, right? A higher level of EI allows me to better engage with that group. So if I have to just summarize it, Alia, I think it's not an added asset, right? So I think a lot of times people assume that emotional intelligence is an added asset that an HR professional should have. I
Right.
will say it is a core competency that an HR professional needs to possess.
Yeah.
And which is why it's increasingly becoming a part of hiring processes. It's being tested during hiring, during, how performance evaluations happen, because it's significant part of how we are expected to navigate our role, and truly partner with business, in their priorities while keeping people at the center. So that's how I like to put it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When you said core competency, I had a very big smile on my face because I think for so many of us, when we look back at our own work lives, right, I think in that reflection also get to know what moments in our careers might have been made easier or made more positive, right, with an emotionally intelligent HR or people professional. So 100% think it's a core competency. And, given how much we've been talking about its value, I think there's a lot of HR professionals out there who are listening today who are probably thinking, hey, now I want to know how emotionally intelligent I am. So, from your own personal experience, are there kind of benchmarks you'd suggest people assess their current emotional intelligence status, if you will, or level?
Yeah, so I think before we get into benchmarks, right, I would probably say that individuals should actually look at self-assessing their emotional intelligence, right? And there are lots of tools, that are available out there. Before going into those assessments, I'll say understand why are you assessing your emotional intelligence, right? Have you got feedback that there is work for you to do, right? What do you hope to achieve? So I think start from there.
Yeah.
With conscious efforts, you can continuously develop your EI over time. So periodically keep assessing it, right? So you're just able to, see if I'm making progress or not. There are some really good, assessments that are available in the market. There's something which is called as an MSCIT test. It's a short form for Mayer, Salovey, Caruso Emotional Intelligence Test. This is the most widely used test that is there. It helps you to measure your ability to perceive, understand, and manage emotions, right? So it goes with this concept that EI can be measured in a very similar manner to IQ. So that's one test that, I say people take it, right? It gives you a lot of understanding of where you stand. And the second one, which, is also very, very widely used, is the emotional quotient inventory, called as EQI 2.0. So if you just search this on Google, you'll find it. This is another very popular, reliable emotional intelligence test. It is based on the 5 elements or domains that, actually define emotional intelligence. So, when you take these two, you just kind of get an idea of where you stand, what more you need to do. And then, if you feel you've worked on it, go back again after some time and benchmark. I think the best way for you to benchmark on EI is against yourself, because, you just to see how you are actually improving time and again on this in this area.
Right. I mean, I love taking tests. So my best friend is a psychologist, and when she was doing her master's program, any test that she could administer on me, I would always ask her to make me her guinea pig. That sounds very valuable. And also the idea of sort of increasing your baseline, right?
Yes.
Is a very reassuring concept that emotional intelligence is kind of like a muscle that can get stronger the more it's worked on. Harshit, you did mention, the 5 aspects of emotional intelligence. Maybe it's a good time to break those aspects down as well. So I'm going to name them and you can take them for explanation. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So the first one is self-awareness. So if you want to break that down for us.
Sure. I think it's very self-explanatory, Alia, right? So this is your ability, to recognize and understand your own emotions, your own moods, what drives you, right? And it's not just about understanding them for yourself, but it is also about how it affects others. And then what it does is that it creates genuine confidence in individuals than false self-esteem. So that's what is self-awareness in emotional intelligence.
Okay. I think closely following that would be self-regulation, which is again another aspect of emotional intelligence. So what do you think that relates to, and especially for HR professionals, where would that come into play?
Yeah, so it's the ability to control, right? It's the ability to control, it's the ability to redirect,
Hmm.
all of those disruptive moods, impulses, things that come into your mind before you're acting upon it. And this is a very strong pillar of emotional intelligence, Ali, right? Because so many times, in a fit of anger, in a fit of emotions, we just end up acting. Self-regulation is that ability where you are able to channelize that in the right way, right? So that's very important. And what happens is that when you're able to do this really well for the world outside, you're able to show that you're someone who can be trusted.
Hmm.
You are someone who believes in integrity. You are someone who's very comfortable with ambiguity and change.
So the next one, I don't even know, you said self-awareness was self-explanatory, but I feel like this one, especially for HR professionals, social skill, right?
Social skill doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert, right? What it actually means is that this is your ability or the aspect, right, of how you're managing the relationships that you build around with people to
Hmm.
move in a desired direction, right? So oftentimes, as HR professionals, that there are certain business priorities, there are certain business objectives that have to, be done, right? That have to be accomplished.
Yeah.
And it's your ability to really build those relationships, leverage upon that, right, and move people in that direction. And so that's what actually social skill is, right? So what truly encompasses, Alia, is the ability to lead change, to build that network, right, navigate all of the social complexities that exist, right, in an organization.
No, that's fantastic. And it kind of relates to the idea of working smart as well, right? Knowing when
Yes.
you can, leverage certain relationships and when bridging certain gaps comes into play. I think you're right. Being an introvert doesn't in any way make it less possible for you to be a great people professional. Moving on, we've got the other aspect of empathy. Again, pretty self-explanatory for why an HR professional should be empathetic. But yeah, carry on.
So I have a slightly different flavor to it, right? So when you say empathy and emotional intelligence, it's not just about relating to the other person and understanding what they're going through from an emotional perspective. It's
Yeah,
also the ability to understand the emotional makeup of the person, right?
right.
So it's basically the skill that you develop over time to treat people according to their emotional reactions,
Yeah,
right? So oftentimes what we try to do is we try to treat people with how we feel and how we emote.
yeah.
Emotional intelligence says that, when you're empathizing with someone, just treat them according to the way they react to certain situations, they react to emotions. And when you actually start doing that, I think is where, you people truly feel that as an HR professional, you're fostering an inclusive and a respectful work environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think very valid point there about, understanding what makes the other person tick. Because like you said, most of this profession is all about relationship management in the first place, right? Yeah. And finally, so this aspect, not as self-explanatory and one that I found quite interesting, the idea of motivation and how that ties into emotional intelligence, Harshit.
Yes. And I think this is my favorite part of emotional intelligence. So people who have a high degree of emotional intelligence, Alia, they are motivated by things beyond reward, beyond money, beyond fame, beyond title, beyond recognition, right? They are people who are passionate about what they do.
Mm-hmm.
They are people who are very passionate about what they bring to the table, their work. They seek inner fulfillment, um, and are driven to achieve for the sake of achievement itself, right? I think it's an interesting statement. Yeah, they're driven to achieve for the sake of achievement itself because they feel that I need to do something larger than just the usual stuff, right? So that's what actually motivates them.
That's fantastic. Maybe, correlates to purpose as well, having a purpose that's larger than just the immediate stuff, right? So, Harshit, we're, quickly inching towards the end of today's conversation, which is
Yeah.
exciting to me, but I do want to go out with a bit of a bang. When you think of emotional intelligence, right, and a person possessing said intelligence, now I'm realizing this question might be a bit redundant because an emotionally intelligent person would never blur the lines. But I think for people who are looking to work on the skill, maybe this is an important area to discuss, right? The line between being an emotionally intelligent, feeling people professional, and then being professional as well. How would you caution people against that? Is it something you think even needs to be talked about?
No, it is, because oftentimes you can blur boundaries, right? So it's very important that you set clear boundaries, right? So as HR professionals, it's important that you maintain the professional limits of relationship at work, right? It's important to be empathetic. It's important to be understanding, right? But that really shouldn't translate into over involvement of personal affairs, right?
Yeah.
So over involvement into personal affairs, which is important, and that's why you need to set that clear boundaries. And the second thing I will say is that it's important for you to remember as an HR professional that a lot of times people are sharing emotional information with you, right? They're opening up to you. They are, being vulnerable to you, right? So it's very important for you to use that information appropriately. It's a huge responsibility, right? So, which means that, your approach, your, conversations with people have to be in a professional context, right? You have to ensure that when people are being vulnerable to you, you keep it to yourself, right? And, not use that in some other context, right? So I think that's very important. And I think the third bit I will say is respect diversity, right? You have to respect diversity of opinions, diversity of emotions. People come from different backgrounds, people come from different culture, people come from a different walk of life.
Yeah.
So, emotional intelligence demands that you are aware of how comfortable people are, what level and what extent they will be wanting to be open with you, and then you, again, going back to saying that, you set clear boundaries. So yes, it can be very easy for you to blur boundaries, overstep, but if you have that fine balance, I think eventually it will work in your favor.
Yeah, and hey, if you're self-aware, then maybe
Absolutely.
it will become easier as the days go by. This has been a very insightful and enlightening conversation, Harshit. I have to thank you so much for joining us and being our partner into the exploration, right, of emotional intelligence and just how important it is for HR professionals out there to build it as a core competency. And I think we've made a pretty good case for it on the podcast together. So thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
No, it was a pleasure being here. Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. Before I end the podcast, I'll probably like to just suggest, 3 books which I feel anybody who's wanting to understand this space a little bit more earlier should read.
The Great FM reading list. Not just good, get great with these books.
The first book, right, is Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. So, Daniel Goleman has actually published many books around this topic. But his first book, right, really helps you understand why emotional intelligence is more important than IQ. So that's a must read, I would say. The second book, which is often not talked about a lot, but I loved the book. It's called as Permission to Feel by Mark Brackett. This book helps you understand how to effectively use your emotions for your own success and well-being in both your personal lives and in a work environment. So that's something that, I'd recommend people to read. The third book is, Emotional Intelligence Habits by Dr. Travis Bradbury. This is a very famous book. It's a little bit more corporate strategy approach to, forming good emotional habits and breaking bad ones, in a workplace environment. So yeah, I'd say start reading by this. There are lots of, online material available, lots of good podcasts, which would also include this one. So, read, listen, and make yourself more aware about emotional intelligence.
Yes, let's include this one. I think that's a good idea. Thanks so much, Harshit. And that was a great reading list, something that we're going to be featuring on all the Great FM podcasts to come, at least for the foreseeable future. Thanks so much, Harshit, once again for being with us on this episode. And to all of the HR professionals out there, I will accompany you now in taking those tests. Let's assess where we're at and just keep growing. Thanks so much for tuning in.
This is Great FM.